Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bill Goldis. I'll be presenting today on capacity planning in Epicor. So the objective here of capacity management planning is to identify points of constraint in the manufacturing system. So on the shop floor, what, if anything, can be done to relieve these bottlenecks? Capacity planning does not attempt to provide level loads across all resources or groups, and it does not attempt to load level by period. What makes up our capacity situation? Well, we have a supply side versus demand side capacity. Quite simply, the supply side is how much capacity do we have? So this is basically determined by what's called rated capacity. I will explain that in just a few minutes on a future slide. And then quite simply, the demand side is how much capacity do we need? This is determined by our job estimates and methods of manufacturing data and material constraints. How fast do we believe that we can run particular operations on particular resources? How do those resources line up in your method of manufacturing? And constraints on raw materials like lead times and when are your vendors available, etc. So how is our capacity as an organization, as the shop floor established and created? A primary tool and input is the production calendar. These are going to specify days and hours that a resource is available to work. And this works on many levels. At a minimum, you have to have one production calendar that defines the company at the company level. So that's at a minimum. You can also have different calendars by site, then by resource group, and by resource. So you can, if your site operates 5 days a week, 24 hours a day, but you have a resource group, say your paint booth that only operates for 8 hours a day because you can only staff it for 8 hours a day, or you can schedule or have those production calendars constrain the resource group as well as the resource. In addition, you can put calendars on your suppliers. For instance, if you're here in the US, obviously, and your suppliers are most often going to be using the pretty standard calendar that is US federal holidays. But if they're in Europe or in Asia, there are different holidays. So you can have that set at the supplier level too. And that's going to constrain that resource, that supplier, that resource or resource group, etc., based on the calendar. A rated capacity, as we call it, is the true or realistic capacity, accounting for all factors. Those factors are hours per day, which is going to be defined by your schedule. But what's the actual? Is there going to be something else that's going to constrain those hours? Something else that's going to say, hey, we can't actually utilize a resource on a shift for 8 hours. There's going to be some times that we can't. Also, how much, if it's available, how much is it actually utilized? So breaks and maintenance. At the end of the day, we have to clean up for half an hour so a resource isn't actually running and producing parts. And also the efficiency. So there's always hey, this is capable of achieving 60 pieces per minute, but what's your actual production efficiency? And many companies will also put a fudge factor in of, say, 90%, 85%, whatever works for your company. And as you see the truth over time, those factors can be adjusted in your rated capacity such that you get closer to the actual value. And of course, what can we do to increase capacity? Well, the easiest thing, if you're not already running 3 shifts, is to add shifts. And when I say easy, I know it's not easy, but you have the equipment, you have the you have the space on your floor, you have everything except for the staffing if you're not running that equipment on that shift for that reason. You can also attempt to increase your utilization or your efficiency. How do you do that? You can do work studies on how you're running it, what's the actual movements of the operation, where material is placed, to increase your efficiency. And for your utilization, you can bring in additional staff to do the cleanup if you're able to do that while the resource is still running, etc. What are some capacity planning tools here in Epicor? To get down to brass tacks on the software. And one of the primary is the shop load a report. Let me bring that up. Here is, this is a report that's under production and reports. The cutoff date is when it starts. The interval is the number of units. You can go in weeks or days. You can do a summary only. You can identify the first bucket as infinite. Just a quick note on infinite versus finite scheduling. This is kind of beyond today's discussion, but by default, ERP systems are going to assume an infinite capacity, and they're going to schedule things to meet your dates. Obviously, capacity is not infinite. That's where the production planner comes into play and uses capacity management, you know, to achieve your goals. So what I'm talking about here is we're going to assume a system is going to assume an infinite capacity, and we're going to make capacity moves here to get the results that we need. For this particular example, I chose to look at weeks here and 1 week at a time for the interval. I selected the assembly department to show you an example of what we get here from a shop load report that has some overload. And the report here is here. So I'm just highlighting a portion to have a look at this here. This is the department is assembly. This is looking at one resource group, line 1 here. And we can see here are the capacity buckets 1 week at a time, 5/6 to 5/12, 5/13 to 19, 20 to 26, etc. These are defined by the calendar that's on that resource group. And we can see here, and what's our load? There's 40, 40, 40, 40, and 40 hours each week here. That's from a job 2041. From 2046, there's also that load of 10.67, 40, and 80. Now, when we look down at our totals, this report's going to say, here's our total load, here's our capacity, and here's what's remaining. Obviously, when they're negative, you're overloaded. So we can see here, 40 load, 40, and no capacity here on this week. I'm not sure why, but so we're in the hole there, 40 hours. That's going to be negative capacity. Here we have 57 load, 40 capacity. So a resource group has 40, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 days a week set up here. Doesn't have it on this day. So we can see as we have this second job here, 2046, on these 3 days, and that's putting us into an overload position, 10.6 hours here, 40 hours here, and 16 there. When we see this, that we have an overload, the question is, what do we do about it? So using the other tools here in Epicor, we can look at the overload informer here. And this is basically a sophisticated dashboard. We know we have an issue here with assembly line 1 is resource group. So if I pull this up here, we can actually run this wide open to see all departments. I set this here to show the assembly department and line 1. And once you do that and you refresh it, there's an actual. Here are the overloads that we saw here for the week of the 20th. So here from 28 through 26 here, 2021. And we can see here's the hours that are being loaded. Here's the overcapacity. So, those are the days where for this particular line on this department that we had an overload. So that's the 40 hours here that we're seeing right here. And the 10.67, if we look a week earlier, we'll see here, there's the 2.67, and here's the 8 to make it 10.67 on the 16th and 17th. And for the overload informer, you can look here and you can clear this, just for example, and we put in a department for assembly, a no cutoff date, and run that. And we'll see all of our overloads for that particular resource group, that department. Here's all the resources here. So we can select any of those. So, and once we've determined that we have an overload, what can we do about it? Well, one of the other tools in Epicor is the resource scheduling board. So when you go to the scheduling board, you can choose either by resource group or resource. I'm aware that from the shop load report, and then or from the overload informer, I can see that I have an overload on this line 1 here. The resource that's for here is a resource scheduling board, so I can do it by resource. And then here, if we look at the schedule, here's the dates that we're looking at. Here's the 2 jobs. You can see here, if we look at the shop load report, a job 2041 and 2046, here's where they overlap. Right here, that's where we have the overload. Now, from the schedule board, we can actually just move this down, and then we'll be able to manipulate the scheduling details here. Once we're happy, with our start date and time, and we say okay, That's going to update the schedule to what's called a what if status. And again, I can't dig into that too much today because we're almost out of time. But from here, we can accept our changes, accept the current job would be the same as accept all. But once we move these around, we can eliminate that overload. Of course, we're going to change the delivery date of 2046, and it's probably going to be late. And we can see that all from our scheduling details where we just were. If I wasn't sure, I just hit undo. That's going to put it back where it was. And there we are. Again, once you move this, if I can go all the way up to here, there's a month later. Now here is all my options for my actual, here's the current situation, 5/16. Here's what I'm proposing. Move it all the way to July 1st. And from within the resource and schedule board, you can reschedule specific resources, and then you can run a global average schedule so everything will sync back up. And with that what if status, you can go back and you can review before you lock those in on the schedule what's going to ultimately happen and what the impact's going to be on your delivery dates. The tough answer is sometimes you're going to need to disappoint one customer or one job for another. You can also do things like find subcontractors here. If, hey, I'm going to be over capacity painting or cutting, I have someone who can help me with that. You can reach out to them. That is Shop Load, the Overload Informer, and the Resource Scheduling Board. Those are the tools. Thanks for your time. Have a great rest of the day.
Thanks all.